It's been well over a year now since Dallas McCarver's passing, and I decided to re-release. I still see men coming in harmed organically from anabolic steroid use.
In August 2017, a 300-pound bodybuilder collapsed on his kitchen floor. The bodybuilding industry quickly came up with a comforting lie to protect its darkest secrets. But the forensic autopsy shattered the cover-up. When medical examiners cut open the world's most elite physiques, they don't just find muscle. What they find can only be described as a horrifying anatomical crime scene. Prepare yourself, because what doctors find waiting on the examiner's table will truly shock you. Let's be honest, bodybuilding has gone from a sport about aesthetics to a biological engineering experiment gone wild. The fans and the judges continually demand bigger, more freakish, mass monsters every single year. To deliver on that impossible promise, these athletes are forced to treat their own bodies as high-stakes, volatile lab experiments. They become prisoners of a deeply toxic psychological trap and victims of an out-of-control race to look the biggest, while knowing their internal organs are actively mutating to keep up. But what happens inside a human body when it is pushed past its absolute limit? Dallas McCarver, the 833-gram anchor. On August 7, 2017, the entire bodybuilding community was hit with devastating news. Dallas McCarver, a 26-year-old titan possessing an almost mythical, superhuman physique, was found unresponsive on his kitchen floor. Within hours of his death, a comforting rumor was already sweeping across the internet. It was just a freak accident. The big guy choked on his post-workout bulk meal. This led millions of fans and industry insiders to believe it was an accident, and the sport's extreme, dark chemical underbelly wasn't to blame. The lie was safe, and the illusion of health remained pristine. But ask yourself this: why would an entire multi-million-dollar industry rush to blame a random piece of food for killing a 300-pound global icon? They did it because the truth waiting inside his chest cavity was far more terrifying than any choking hazard. Months after the tragedy, the District 6 medical examiner unsealed the official forensic autopsy file, revealing that Dallas McCarver did not choke. Instead, he was killed by a catastrophic cardiovascular blowout, driven by an internal organ system that was already systematically, aggressively failing under his skin. Let's look at some basic human biology for a moment. A healthy adult male heart weighs between 280 and 340 grams, roughly the size of your clenched fist. It is designed to be a flexible, hollow, dynamic pump that effortlessly circulates blood to every part of your body. But when the forensic pathologists cut Dallas McCarver open, they didn't find a normal human heart. What they pulled out of his chest was a staggering 833-gram organ that is nearly triple the size of a normal human heart, pushing far past any known evolutionary ceiling. Imagine carrying 833 grams of dense muscle tissue inside your chest. Years of pushing his body to impossible extremes had caused severe concentric left ventricular hypertrophy. His heart had grown so incredibly thick, so deeply overgrown, that the interior chambers had shrunk to practically nothing. It had mutated into a solid, heavy block of scar tissue that could no longer expand or contract to move fluid. And the horror inside his body didn't stop at his chest. As the pathologists moved deeper, they discovered even more damage. Thanks to years of extreme chemical strain, his liver had swollen to 4,553 grams, whereas a normal human liver weighs around 1,500 grams. His kidneys were also utterly destroyed, crushed from the inside out by years of chronic, unaddressed high blood pressure. The truth is, he didn't choke on a single bite of food. His body simply shut down mid-bite because it had been forced into a state of permanent, unnatural hyperdrive. When the toxicology reports finally came back, they revealed his hormonal levels were at 57 times the natural human limit. His body was pushing past its limits for so long that a total systemic shutdown wasn't just likely, it was certain. Dallas McCarver was a victim of an industry that demanded more from him than the human body can sustain. a 26-year-old kid who paid the ultimate price to leave behind a spectacular, muscular corpse. But as terrifying as Dallas's unsealed autopsy report was, it proved that the human body has a hard limit. Yet, just a few weeks later, another massive icon of the community would collapse, and his post-mortem investigation would plunge the sport into a completely different kind of nightmare. Because if Dallas's autopsy gave us a clear look at mechanical destruction, the death of his close contemporary would leave behind a deeply haunting, unresolved forensic riddle. Rich Piana, the inconclusive, 670-gram mystery. Rich Piana was the undisputed king of internet bodybuilding transparency. Starting at the tender age of 18, he began a decades-long journey fueled by an aggressive public commitment to what he called the unfiltered truth. He became a megastar by doing what no one else dared to do, looking directly into a camera and detailing the exact extreme substance use required to maintain his gargantuan physique. He explicitly warned his millions of followers that this lifestyle was a dangerous game of self-harm, yet he kept pushing his body anyway. He framed himself as the most honest guide to bodybuilding behind the scenes. But despite his honesty, nothing prepared him for the harsh consequences waiting for him. On a seemingly normal day in August 2017, while simply sitting back and getting a haircut in his home in Clearwater, Florida, he suddenly collapsed onto the floor. By the time emergency responders rushed to the scene, his brain had been subjected to a fatal 30 minutes of oxygen deprivation. He spent over 2 weeks in a medically induced coma before his massive heart finally stopped beating for good on August 25, 2017. In November 2017, the unsealed District 6 medical examiner's autopsy report was finally released to the public. His heart was roughly twice the size of a normal human heart, weighing 670 grams. His liver and his brain were also swollen from the effects of long-term cardiomegaly and severe oxygen starvation. Yet, despite this obvious trauma, the medical examiner made a truly shocking admission. The official report concluded that the exact chemical cause of death had to remain legally inconclusive. Now, you may be wondering how the most documented, chemically enhanced bodybuilder on YouTube left behind a completely blank toxicology file. Well, the answer was simply a procedural failure. You see, the hospital inadvertently discarded all of Rich Piana's primary admission day toxicology specimens before the forensic pathology team could ever run their tests. The local police department executed a search warrant on Piana's property and recovered over 20 hidden bottles of anabolic steroids and growth hormones. His partner openly admitted he had a habit of snorting high-caffeine pre-workout powders through a straw. The entire world knew exactly what kind of extreme chemical playground his body had become. And yet, because of a clerical error in a hospital lab, the final, official medical report remains legally, permanently blank. The exact chemical trigger that led to his death remains unknown. Rich Piana was a man who tried to play a dangerous game with total honesty, but his death proved that when you turn your body into a chemical experiment, you lose all control over how your story ends. But while Rich Piana's tragedy was defined by a bizarre chemical mystery, other titans of the era faced a much more immediate, terrifyingly physical reality. They didn't need a toxicology report to tell them they were dying. They could feel it with every single breath they took. Greg Kovich, the 420-pound prison. To understand the era of extreme size, we have to look at the man who pushed human volume to its absolute crushing limit. Greg Kovach was widely considered the largest competitive bodybuilder of his entire generation.
The heavyweight division saw the American premiere of Greg Kovach, a 270-pound freak from Canada.
In his prime, he walked the earth at an unbelievable off-season weight of over 420 pounds. On paper, he was celebrated as a genetic marvel, a freakish superhero brought to life by sheer willpower and a relentless dedication to building pure mass. But let's look past the glamorous magazine covers and look at the visceral, daily reality of what it actually means to live inside a 420-pound body. Greg Kovacs was an elite, world-class athlete who literally could not perform the most basic human actions. He could not reach down to tie his own shoes without gasping for air. He could not fit into a standard car, forcing him to modify or completely avoid normal vehicles just to travel. More terrifyingly, he lived with the constant, haunting knowledge that if he ever made the mistake of sleeping flat on his back, he risked suffocating to death right there in his bed. His own massive pectoral muscles and heavy chest literally crushing his lungs under their immense weight. Scary. To keep this massive, unnatural machine from shrinking, Kovacs had to subject himself to a brutal, endless cycle of force-feeding himself 10,000 calories daily. Every single meal forced his digestive system to work overtime, while his heart was left running at a constant, explosive red line just to pump blood to a body that was never meant to grow that big. Ironic, isn't it? Greg Kovacs had spent decades aggressively chasing the ultimate physique, only to build a body so incredibly big that it became an inescapable, suffocating cage. The very mass he sacrificed his health to achieve was the exact thing that stripped away his basic human freedom. His cardiovascular system was forced to live in a state of permanent crisis until his heart finally gave in 2013. Greg Kovacs' story shows us the mechanics of what happens when a human being turns themselves into a mountain of muscle and mass. But if Kovacs represents the ultimate mechanical failure of the human machine, our next case takes us into a completely different, deeply horrifying dimension of the sport. Andreas Münzer, the polystyrene liver. Let's go to Munich, back in March of 1996. The bodybuilding world was completely awed by an Austrian phenomenon named Andreas Münzer. He was universally celebrated as the most conditioned, genuinely shrink-wrapped human being to ever walk the earth. His skin looked like wet tissue paper pressed directly against muscle fibers, a legendary aesthetic achieved by dropping his subcutaneous body fat to near absolute 0%. To the fans and the judges, he was the flawless picture of elite human anatomy. But backstage at his final competitions, away from the screaming crowds, the illusion was already completely rotting from within. On March 12, 1996, Münzer experienced a wave of unbearable stomach pain. He was rushed to a local Munich hospital as his body was finally breaking down after months of quietly enduring internal torture. By 7 p.m., desperate doctors wheeled him into emergency surgery, slicing into his abdomen to remedy a violent, uncontrolled hemorrhage raging inside his stomach. But as the surgeons cut through the muscle wall, what they saw was far from healthy human anatomy. His liver hadn't just failed. It had literally mutated into something completely unrecognizable. When doctors examined the organ, they found a crumbly, highly porous, yellow-white mass that forensic pathologists later noted visually resembled polystyrene, or everyday styrofoam. It was completely packed from edge to edge with solid, table tennis ball-sized tumors. It wasn't a liver anymore, it was a sponge. A dry, tumor-ridden sponge that fell apart at the surgeon's touch. This was the devastating direct result of the intense chemistry of corrosion. Münzer's legendary zero-fat conditioning wasn't just a byproduct of hard work. It was catalyzed by massive, lethal doses of potassium-sparing diuretics designed to strip every single drop of water out from under his skin. He had pushed the experiment so far that his blood became profoundly thick and entirely depleted of fluid. His internal organs were effectively left to suffocate, totally starved of basic fluid transport. 2 days later, on March 14, 1996, Andreas Münzer died at the young age of 31. The official forensic autopsy report officialized his cause of death as dystrophic multiple organ failure, revealing traces of over 20 distinct performance-enhancing compounds completely saturating his ruined system. Andreas Münzer treated his body as a chemical playground, and the industry happily cheered him on right until the moment his organs turned to dust, leaving behind a spectacular corpse. But while Munzer's internal collapse took months to fully corrode his system, other athletes would learn the exact same lesson in a matter of mere minutes. Mohammed Benaziza, the paced blood phenomenon, stepped directly onto the brightly lit stage of a European Grand Prix bodybuilding show in 1992. Mohammed Benaziza stood under the blinding flashbulbs, looking absolutely flawless, and within moments, he was crowned the undisputed winner of the competition.
Absolutely. And from Algeria, Mohammed Benaziza. You see him, he appears to be enjoying himself.
He flashed a $1 million smile to the audience, clutching his trophy. He looked like a god. But the second he walked past the heavy velvet curtains and stepped backstage, away from the adoring fans, the spectacular illusion instantly shattered. Without warning, Benaziza's body hit the cold floor as he began experiencing violent, uncontrollable convulsions, gasping for air as thick foam bubbled from his mouth. Backstage crew members panicked, screaming for medical help as the newly crowned champion twisted and writhed in pure agony. Just hours before stepping out under the lights, desperate to achieve that hyper-shredded, paper-thin look, Benaziza had injected a high-potency cardiovascular prescription whose purpose was to forcefully strip every single remaining molecule of water completely out from under his skin. The chemical experiment impressed judges, but destroyed Momo Benaziza's body. Extreme dehydration drained his circulatory system, thickening his blood into a heavy, sludge-like paste. His heart couldn't pump the sludge through his veins. Under agonizing pressure, his cardiovascular system seized, and his heart literally gave out from the inside. Following the tragedy, the Federation released an official public statement, essentially saying that athletes understand the inherent risks of the lifestyle. They treated his passing like an acceptable piece of statistical collateral damage. Mohammed Benaziza gave everything he had to win a plastic trophy, only for his own blood to turn into the very thing that would end his life. His sudden death was a stark reminder that your organs simply do not care about your accolades. Yet, as the race continued to escalate into the 2000s, some athletes didn't just ignore these warnings, they actively weaponized them. They watched their peers fall, and instead of stepping back, they used the internet to predict who would be next. Nasser El Sonbati, the splitting skin. Nasser El Sonbati was widely known across the industry as the thinking man's bodybuilder. He wasn't your average gym rat. He was a highly educated university graduate who spoke multiple languages and frequently read deep political science and history textbooks. In public interviews, he was articulate, deeply analytical, and constantly claimed that his massive 300-pound off-season frame was handled safely because of his intellectual background. He wore a pair of signature glasses on stage, framing himself as the ultimate rational mastermind who had successfully tamed the wild chemistry of the sport. But behind that polished, intellectual mask lay a deeply dark, obsessive double life. Away from the camera, Nasser used to secretly log onto prominent bodybuilding forums under various anonymous burner profiles. He used these hidden accounts to wage a ruthless psychological warfare campaign against his closest stage rivals. With granular precision, he would leak the exact extreme chemical protocols, the stacks of other top-tier pros. More chillingly, he used his advanced understanding of the sport to actively predict exactly whose organs would fail first, essentially writing the future gossip columns of his own community's demise. The tragedy is that while Nasser was busy tracking the mortality of his peers, his own biological clock was quickly running out of time. It was a brilliant mind, completely trapped inside a rapidly rotting, 330-pound frame of his own making. He spent his final months in Cairo, Egypt, in early 2013. Behind the scenes, the intellectual powerhouse image was coming apart. Years of pushing severe growth hormone and massive anabolic cycles had driven his body into terminal, advanced congestive heart failure. His kidneys failed entirely, shutting down his system's ability to filter waste. His oversized, mutated heart grew so structurally weak and damaged that it couldn't even handle a basic blood transfusion without nearly stopping. Then there was the fluid retention. Failing organs caused Nasser El Sonbati's legs to swell and split from fluid retention. Denied a heart transplant due to systemic damage, the thinking man's bodybuilder died at 47 on March 20, 2013. Despite his intellect, Sonbati couldn't outsmart the lethal realities of bodybuilding's mass monster era. His own creation destroyed him. But don't make the mistake of thinking this chemical devastation is a modern phenomenon born in the extreme era of mass monsters. The industry loves to tell us that the pioneers of the past were entirely safe, protected by a golden era of clean living and lighter compounds. But if we look back at the legendary figures of the 1970s, we uncover a much more haunting, long-term truth. Franco Columbu, the permanent scars of the golden era. Let's go to the sun-drenched sands of Gold's Gym Venice in the 1970s. The legendary golden era of bodybuilding. This is the time period that the internet constantly romanticizes. Modern fitness influencers point to these vintage physiques as symbols of pure, classic health, aggressively spreading the widely believed myth that old-school bodybuilders were totally safe because they relied on lighter, basic compounds and prioritized balanced aesthetics over freakish mass. So let's dispel the internet lie right now. There is no such thing as a safe era of chemical enhancement. Franco Columbu was universally seen as the ultimate, shining example of that exact clean living ideal. He wasn't just a two-time Mr. Olympia. He was a licensed, practicing chiropractor who deeply understood human mechanics and spent 33 long, highly disciplined years post-retirement living an incredibly healthy lifestyle. He ate clean, stayed active, and stayed completely away from the extreme chemical culture of the modern stage. He did everything exactly right. But in August 2019, at 78 years old, Franco was simply enjoying a beautiful day swimming off the coast of his native Sardinia in the Pacific when his heart suddenly and completely gave out. When pathologists completed his autopsy, the illusion of a safer golden era was destroyed. Beneath the surface of this clean-living elderly healthcare professional lay a map of permanent, irreversible internal damage. The autopsy revealed deep, severe arterial blockages and a complex network of cardiovascular microscarring. These weren't the result of old age. They were the fingerprints left behind by the unregulated synthetic hormones he had utilized during his competitive youth decades prior. Franco Columbu was a phenomenal athlete and a deeply respected figure, but his autopsy proves that even the gods of the golden era were ultimately just early test subjects. But if Franco's story teaches us about the slow-burning, decades-long fallout of traditional hormone use, our next case shows us what happens when a new generation enters the arena. Aziz Shavershian, Ziz, the perfect storm. Let's move forward to 2011 and dissect the tragic, hyper-accelerated timeline of a young internet icon who thought he could outrun a genetic defect by whipping up the ultimate biological perfect storm. That icon was Aziz Shavershian, the legendary Ziz. Aziz Shavershian, known globally as Ziz, was the undisputed king of internet fitness. With his shredded physique, wild dance moves, and charismatic catchphrases, he built a solid fan base. He preached a lifestyle of pure hedonism, aesthetics, and endless fun. To a generation of young men staring at screens, he looked like he had cracked the code to a perfect, carefree life. But on a hot August day in Bangkok, Thailand, it abruptly ended. Aziz walked into a blistering 90 degrees Celsius sauna, looking for a standard way to sweat out excess water weight and sharpen his conditioning. Minutes later, the 22-year-old superstar collapsed heavily onto the wooden benches, completely unresponsive. He was rushed to a local hospital, but it was already too late. Looking at the forensic breakdown, we learn that a lethal combination of factors made his survival absolutely, physically impossible. Aziz had an undiagnosed congenital heart defect. Now, take that vulnerable heart and throw it into a toxic blender with powerful, dangerous fat-burning stimulants to maintain his razor-sharp look, alongside an aggressive regimen of anabolic substances. Then throw in the extreme heat of a Thai sauna, profound systemic dehydration, and the lingering neurochemical strain of recreational substances from the Bangkok nightlife. He thought he was invincible. The internet told him he was a god, and his genetic heart defect took that personally. His heart didn't slowly fail. It was actively, violently pushed into a complete, catastrophic electrical shutdown. The intense heat, extreme dehydration, and massive chemical overload combined to trigger a fatal arrhythmia that his compromised cardiovascular system simply could not recover from. His passing sent shockwaves through the digital world, exposing the deep, dark underbelly of the online fitness culture. But while Aziz's heart was pushed to an abrupt electrical halt, other young athletes would face a completely different, arguably more terrifying kind of destruction. We talk a lot about enlarged hearts, but what about a shattered mind? Dan Puckett, the neurochemical drop. Let's look at the heartbreaking story of Dan Puckett. In March 2007, this 22-year-old rising star was considered one of the most promising young talents in amateur bodybuilding. He possessed a phenomenal work ethic, an incredibly aesthetic frame, and a bright future that should have kept him on the stage for decades. But behind his disciplined routine lay the sport's deepest, darkest, and most aggressively hidden secret: the terror of the psychological crash. When a competitive athlete suddenly and completely halts an aggressive, heavy chemical cycle without a meticulously managed medical post-cycle therapy, their internal system protests. Their natural testosterone production has already been completely shut down for months. The second the synthetic substances leave their bloodstream, their hormone levels plummet to absolute zero. What follows isn't just a simple mood swing or temporary gym fatigue. It is a profound, paralyzing state of severe clinical depression. Because hormones directly govern your brain's chemistry, this sudden drop causes the brain to stop manufacturing essential neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. The athlete is instantly plunged into a dark, chemical despair that clinical psychologists note perfectly mimics the agonizing neurochemical withdrawal of severe cocaine addiction. Your motivation vanishes, your self-worth evaporates, and your brain is left starved of the ability to feel any joy. On November 7, 2007, Dan Puckett was found unresponsive in his apartment by his roommate. The autopsy showed his physical organs were remarkably, completely okay. The damage wasn't located inside his chest cavity, his liver, or his kidneys. It was a total, devastating neurochemical wipeout deep inside his brain. Dan Puckett was a tragic victim of a machine that trains young men to value their external reflection while completely ignoring the fragile chemical balance keeping their minds sane. But if Dan's tragedy shows us the devastating fallout of a sudden individual mental crash, our next athletes reveal how those same psychological effects can stretch across decades. Mike and Ray Menser, the 48-hour doom loop. When an entire lifetime is built on obsessive perfection and deep, unresolved paranoia, the psychological breakdown can trap an entire family in a terminal loop. Let's look at two legendary brothers who ruled the sport, Mike and Ray Menser. In Sydney, Australia, on the stage of the highly controversial 1980 Mr. Olympia contest, Mike Menser was at his peak, an intellectual powerhouse who revolutionized training with his heavy-duty, high-intensity philosophy. He expected to win the Sandow Trophy. Instead, an unretired Arnold Schwarzenegger stepped on stage at the last minute and took the victory. Mike was utterly devastated. He maintained until his very death that the entire contest was completely rigged against him.
There is the overall champion, Mike Menser from
Washington, D.C.
That single loss sent Mike into a lifelong, agonizing spiral of deep paranoia and total self-neglect. He didn't just walk away from competing, he lost his sanity. To fuel his obsessive, around-the-clock writing and philosophical work, he began heavily abusing powerful, dangerous central nervous system stimulants as everyday boosters. As the years turned into decades, his physical health began to deteriorate. Yet, driven by a profound, deeply rooted distrust of the medical establishment and authority figures, Mike completely abandoned his prescribed heart medications. In June 2001, the effects of his lifestyle finally caught up with him. Mike Mentzer was found lifeless in his apartment, his heart failing after years of unaddressed chemical and psychological strain. But the horror didn't end with Mike. Just 48 hours later, the story took a devastating turn. Living in that same apartment was his younger brother, Ray Mentzer, himself a legendary, once massive bodybuilder who was now completely broken, fragile, and utterly dependent on daily kidney dialysis to survive. Discovered by a friend who went to check on the apartment, Ray was found dead in the very same room, passing away a mere 2 days after his brother. But as we look back at the shattered minds and broken hearts of these individual icons, we have to stop focusing on just the victims. We have to widen our scope and look directly at the architect of this whole thing, because these men were not dosing themselves. They were actively guided by a shadow network of profit-driven enablers sitting comfortably at the head of the table. The pathology of the modern mass monster. Every month, vulnerable athletes hand over thousands of hard-earned dollars to self-proclaimed chemical masterminds, keyboard experts, and high-priced coaches in exchange for wildly volatile substances and dosages. And these people know exactly what these chemicals do to the human body. In fact, they deliberately push these athletes to the very edge of acute organ failure to squeeze out an extra 1% of skin-splitting dryness or muscle fullness. Bodybuilders trade their long-term biological survival for cheap, injection-molded plastic trophies that cost $20 to make, and a local title that pays almost nothing in prize money. They are literally handing away their 30s, their 40s, their entire future for temporary social media clout and a few thousand likes from strangers who will scroll right past them tomorrow. Those behind the scenes pocket the cash. The crowd gets their entertainment, and the athlete is left to deal with the consequences. It is the most lopsided transaction in sports. The industry sells an illusion, yet every file on the examiner's table confirms that this illusion is nothing more than a temporary loan with a lethal, guaranteed interest rate. The question sitting at the center of all of this is genuinely somber. Is the fleeting glory of being a digital titan worth the permanent destruction of your actual humanity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, check out the one on your screen right now. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.